I begin this book by talking about something quite personal, and that is a dream that I had when I was 17 years old. And in this dream, I see a little girl inside of a masjid, and she asks me a question. She asks me, why do people have to leave each other? I was only 17. I didn't know much about what would come later in my life. But I'm having this dream where this little girl's asking me this question. Why do people have to leave each other? I hadn't experienced this yet, but the question was very personal. And I realized that this question was very relevant to me because I was the type of person who was very highly sensitive, and I was the type of person from when I was a child I would get very attached, and not necessarily in a healthy way. So for example, if I was in a daycare and my parents had to leave me for a while, I was one of those kids who would start crying and not stop crying. Other children could calm down. My dad used to say that when you started crying, you wouldn't stop. And so I was very sensitive from the beginning. This was my nature. I was a very sensitive child. And I would get very attached. It was very hard for me when my parents would have to leave. It was very hard for me anytime there was, for example, a problem with one of my friends. I would take it very deep. It would hit me very hard, and I would have trouble coping, and I would have trouble recovering. And I give this analogy that it's like if you take a vase, and you put the vase at the edge of the table, that vase is likely to fall and break. And so what I was doing is that through my unhealthy types of attachments to my friends, to everything around me, to moments, to outcomes, I needed things to work out a certain way, or else I was devastated. And so what I was doing is I was setting myself up for disappointment over and over and over because I had these very unrealistic expectations. My expectations were that this life had to be perfect. My expectations were that people around me had to be perfect. My expectations were that my relationships had to be perfect. And if they weren't, I was heartbroken. I didn't know how to accept anything less than perfection. And so what I started to realize, and this happened later on in my life, is that we always learn about love of dunya as being an attachment to material things. We're always taught that love of dunya is an attachment to things like money, or jewelry, or cars, or big lavish houses. But what we're not often taught is that love of dunya, hubb dunya, this destructive disease of the heart, can also be unhealthy attachments to people. And that was the realization that changed my life. I never knew this before. And because I didn't know this, I was continuously getting hurt. I was continuously becoming heartbroken by everyone around me and situations around me. And it was because I was having expectations of this life as if this life was Jannah. And what I realized is that this life is never going to be perfect. And if you expect this life to be perfect, it's like trying to extract water from fire. Trying to put your hand in the fire and get water. You're only going to end up getting burned. And that's what I was doing with my expectations and my attachments. But what I had to realize was that a lot of it had to do with my unhealthy, false attachments to people around me. From the very beginning, the type of attachments that I had with the people in my family, all the way to my friends. And once I realized this, it changed the way I interacted with people, and it changed the way I interacted with this life. Now, I finished the chapter by answering the question in this dream. But what's interesting about the answer that I gave her is that it was a lesson that I would actually spend my life having to learn. And I didn't understand this at the time that I was 17, but it was a very interesting answer that I gave her. She asked me, why do people have to leave each other? And in the dream I said to her, because this life isn't perfect. If it was, what would Jannah be called? What would the next life be called? And so this answer really was deeper than I realized at the time, but what it meant was when we put our full dependence on this life, when we put our full dependence on the creation, as we should only depend on Allah, it's like a person who's climbing a cliff and holds on to a twig. What happens? That twig is going to snap and that person is going to fall. Now, is it the twig's fault that you held onto it with your full weight and it broke? And the answer is no. It's our fault because only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a handhold that never breaks. For us to put our ultimate dependence, our ultimate love, our ultimate hope, and our ultimate reliance